Hello, students. This is Mr. Jacobson again, coming to you somewhere in LA. Looking forward to spending this time with you. Today, we're going to be discussing the Nile and early Egypt. We're finished with Mesopotamia, and now we're moving on to the next chapter. We'll be discussing Egypt for the next couple of weeks. So excited to be with you and to do this. So, if you look here, this area was where we studied for the last couple of weeks here. This is Mesopotamia. We studied Sumer, studied about the Sargon of Akkad, Assur and the mighty Assyrians. We studied also, well, we looked into the Hittites. So this is where we were at. And now for the next couple of weeks going forward, we're going to jump, not too far, but we're going to jump over here to this area right here, Egypt. So here's Mesopotamia, and here's Egypt. And do you see all this little green area, the light green, and all of it going down here? All this green area is a result of the Nile River. Because of this green river, or this green area, is going to allow people to be able to farm and to uh, have crops and to sustain life and family. It's all going to be done because of the Nile River. So let's go a little closer up here. So here we go. Here's the Nile River again. This is called the Nile Delta way up here. And then as you go down, this is called the Nile River Valley. This is the Nile, and the green that's around it is the lush area around it. Everywhere else around here, if you look out here, this is called the Western Desert, the Eastern Desert. Egypt is mostly a desert. Egypt, no one would have settled in Egypt. We wouldn't be talking about Egypt if it weren't for the Nile. The Nile is the very reason why people lived in Egypt. The Nile is the very reason why Egypt existed, period. Why we have the pyramids, why we have anything that's significant about what we know about ancient Egypt. It's because of the Nile. Without the Nile, nobody would have settled here because it was just a big desert. So that brings me to a very famous quote. It says that Egypt is the gift of the Nile. So basically, the Nile had a gift, and it was Egypt. Which goes to what I said before, without the Nile River, Egypt is nothing. Egypt would not exist as we know it today. There would be no pyramids, there would be no pharaohs. So, Egypt got little rainfall, so the people relied on the Nile for cleaning, for cooking, for fishing, for bathing, etc. The Nile is about 4,000 miles long. It's the longest river, it's even longer than the Amazon. Along the Nile, there are narrow cliffs and boulders called cataracts. So here's another map of Egypt to give you an idea. So here we have the Nile Delta up here, which is the most fertile of all the parts of Egypt. And as you go through, you see this number one here, right about around Aswan. You see this is the first cataract. And then here's the second cataract, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and then the sixth. These cataracts are significant, and I'll explain why. So as you see these two pictures, you see how the Nile River is very nice and flowy and it's very smooth and calm here? Yeah, so this isn't a cataract. This is a cataract. A cataract is an area where there's cliffs and boulders and steep edges where it's not easy to get through. So here would be fun and probably even enjoyable to be on the water trading. Here it would not. You would probably die. And Egypt has, going back, has about six, maybe even a little bit more as you go further down, cataracts where you can't sail down the whole Nile River. Uh, like Mesopotamia, if you had good enough, you could sail down the Euphrates with very little problem. But with the Nile, you can't sail down the whole Nile, because once you get to one of these cataracts, you have to get out, or you will face some serious danger. So within Egypt, people used the Nile for trading and transportation. Winds from the north pushed sailboats south. The flow of the Nile carried them north. Egyptian villages thus had frequent friendly contact with one another, unlike the hostile relationships between the Mesopotamian city states. So things are going okay for. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the river people. So regular flooding. This is why regular flooding on the Nile. It was dependable. It was gentle. Farmers could actually use it to their advantage. It left a layer of dark, fertile mud called kimmut. People planted like wheat, barley, flaxseed. Irrigation was easy to maintain off of the Nile because again the flood waters were easy to predict. If the flood was bigger than normally anticipated, they dig huge basins so that it just huge massive holes in the ground, so when the water does flood more than usual, instead of it flooding out to someone's farm, it would all go into a big basin, a big pit, and it'd have to fill up that whole pit before it could rise up and go further and destroy fields. And then hieroglyphs were popular in Egypt. There's about maybe a couple thousand of picture symbols that they have today. So this is what hieroglyphs look like. And the Nile River irrigation, first they used basins as we talked about. Second, dikes. Dikes were heaping mounds of earth that they would put, and if the water overflowed, the dikes would be there to stop the water from flooding out. We have canals where obviously canals, they are canals and ditches are dug into the ground and they're meant to lead the water uh, out to the farm area so that everything could be farmed properly. And then shadoofs, which we will talk about in a little bit. So here is a shadoof. A shadoof, it's a really cool contraption. This is technology that was found in Egypt. See, it was hard to go down to the Nile River, get water out, and leave. So they would create a huge basin, and then in that basin they'd build a shadoof. And instead of having to go all the way down to the bank, get a big thing, a heavy thing of water, which might have been too heavy for him to carry, um, they would attach it to this pole here, and they would put a counterbalance here. So with this being a counterbalance, it allowed them to be able to put this in the water and then to pull it back out without any problem because there's so much weight on this end that it was easy to pull it out. So here's another picture here. You see here are your canals. Here are your dikes, which again are mounds of earth. And these were built in case the water does fill up this canal, then it would have to fill up further to get over the dikes. So a dike protected the flood from destroying any crops. Oh, and there was shadoofs, I think, back there. Yes, you see the shadoofs here as well. So here's an actual painting of a shadoof from ancient Egypt. And you can see the man here. He has it here. Here's the counterbalance. Really cool contraption. So the hieroglyphs eventually get worded into an alphabet, and you have this here as well. Okay, so the advances in farming, crafts, and trade created a huge need for government in Egypt. Irrigation systems had to be built and maintained, and surplus gained had to be stored and passed out in times of need. Gradually, government emerged to plan and to direct such activities. So, eventually, when your society gets more complex, you have to have government. You need somebody in charge to call the shots, to see what needs to be fixed, and that person needs to now have other people who work for him to help fix the problems, which means you have now a government. So Egypt is going to break into two kingdoms. You're going to have Lower Egypt, which is in the north, and Upper Egypt, which is in the south. I get that that's probably a little confusing. It would seem that you think the Upper Egypt should be in the north and Lower Egypt should be in the south, but that's not how the Egyptians saw it. See, we're looking at it from a global point of view. Egypt looked at, they didn't have the whole globe. Um, so to them, because the Nile flowed from north, or I'm sorry, since the Nile flowed down this way from south to north, okay, then Egyptians looked at this as Upper Egypt because this was obviously higher ground than Lower Egypt. So they saw this is Upper Egypt, although it's now we know it's south. Okay, it's in the southern more. It's southern than Lower Egypt. They still call this Upper Egypt because the Nile flowed from the bottom here all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. So Upper, Lower Egypt. So the Upper Egyptian crown is this white helmet looking thing. The Lower Egyptian crown is this red helmet looking thing. So there's a man who is considered the unifier of Egypt. His name is Narmer, and he was the king of Upper Egypt, and he eventually conquered Lower Egypt. Now, the first time Egypt was unified was during Narmer. This is the first time that both Upper and Lower Egypt was completely conquered, and was conquered under one pharaoh, whose name was Narmer. So Narmer, to signify the unity and his power, he combined the two crowns. So here you have the crown of the north, the crown of Upper Egypt, and the crown of Lower Egypt. So here we see it again. Here's the crown of Upper Egypt, crown of Lower Egypt, and you put them together and you get what's called the double crown of Egypt. Remember this. This is very important. So it's the double crown of Egypt. So this is an actual illustration from ancient Egypt that shows Narmer before he conquers Lower Egypt. As you can see, he's wearing the white crown. He has a scepter in his hand, and he has some enemy in his grip of his hand, and it looks like he's about to smite, maybe crack his head or break his neck or something, as a way to show his dominance and power of conquering the all of Egypt. So if you look here to the right, this is an artist's interpretation of what it may have looked like. Here's Narmer's men. Here's fire, mayhem, people dying, and Narmer is showing his power, and perhaps this is even the one who used to be the ruler of Lower Egypt. Who knows? So once Narmer conquered Lower Egypt and unified all of Egypt, both Upper and Lower Egypt, he moved his capital to Memphis. So he had Thebes as his capital, and he's going to move it here to Memphis. And the reason he's going to do that is because he's going, see, this is Upper Egypt, this is Lower Egypt, right? Okay, so Upper Egypt, look how far away Thebes is from Lower Egypt. That doesn't make sense, even especially if you're worried that there's going to be some rebellion and uprising. If your capital's way over here, it's going to take a long time to put it down here. But if you move your capital to the middle of your kingdom, to Memphis, then you have a shot to put down lower Egyptian rebellions, if there are any. So he moved from Thebes to Memphis so that he could be in the middle of his kingdom so he can handle things. And after Narmer died, his family continued to rule, and this succession of rulership becomes a dynasty. And that's pretty much it. So after Narmer is going to be the dynasty of pharaohs. The dynasty is going to go for over 30 different dynasties. It's the power, and it's a a mark of how powerful Egypt was for a very long part of world history. And so go ahead and write your one-page summary, and I look forward to discussing all this with you at the first of the week. Thanks. Bye bye.